You ever like look at a friend's baby pictures and you're like, whoa, how did their face go from that to, well, that?
It really is remarkable the transformations the human face goes through, from infancy to adulthood.
And that's what we're diving into today, this world of orthodontics, specifically how our faces grow and develop,
Mm.
to make room for all those pearly whites.
And thankfully, we've got some awesome source material to help us unpack it all. Mental Dental on YouTube, they've got a knack for breaking down even the most complex orthodontic stuff.
Totally. We're going to dive deep into all those biological processes,
Yeah.
how it all actually works. And okay, maybe this is a silly question, but I always thought growth and development were the same thing, but there's a difference.
Yeah, there is a difference. It's subtle, but it's important.
Yeah.
So think about it this way. Growth, that's like when your kid has a growth spurt over the summer. Suddenly, bam, they're 6 inches taller. It's just getting bigger, pure, and simple.
Okay, I'm starting to see the distinction.
And then you have development. Think about a kid learning to ride a bike. It's not that they're getting bigger, really. It's that they're gaining skills, getting more complex.
So growth is more measurable,
Yeah.
like height and weight and all that. And development is what, more about stages and milestones.
You got it. And get this, if we zoom in even further, down to the cellular level, there are actually two main processes driving all this growth: hypertrophy and hyperplasia.
Ooh, okay. I'm going to need an analogy for those two words.
Of course. Think about a muscle after you've worked out. It gets bigger, right?
Right.
That's hypertrophy. Individual cells getting swole. Now imagine adding more bricks to a wall. It's getting larger overall, right? That's hyperplasia. More cells joining the party.
Uh-huh. So growth is like this 1-2 punch. Cells are getting bigger, A&E multiplying at the same time.
Exactly. It's like a two-pronged approach to building a bigger, better you, right?
Right. But, and maybe this is obvious, it's not just about getting bigger, it's about getting bigger in the right way.
Exactly. And that's where these growth patterns come in. And one of the most important ones is this thing called the cephalocaudal growth gradient.
Okay, I got to be honest, that sounds a little intimidating.
Yeah, it's a mouthful. Basically, it just means we grow from the head down. Cephalo head, caudal tail.
Okay, like a tadpole turning into a frog. I get it.
Exactly. The head takes the lead and everything else catches up later.
So that's why babies have those, like, adorably oversized heads.
Exactly. At birth, a baby's head is like 50% of their body length. Can you imagine?
Talk about top heavy. But obviously, those proportions change a lot as we grow up.
Yeah, by adulthood, our heads are only about 12% of our total body length.
Wow. And, thinking about it, that explains why babies grow out of clothes so quickly. They're literally growing into their heads.
That's a good way to put it. But here's the thing. It's not like everything grows at the same rate, right?
Right.
And to understand that, that's where Scammonn's growth curves come into play. It's like they're these visual roadmaps showing how different tissues and systems in our bodies, they all grow on their own schedule.
It's like everyone's following a different itinerary on this growth journey.
I like that. And some tissues, like those in our nervous system, they get a really early start. They do most of their growing in those first few years, reaching almost adult size by age, like 6 or 7.
Wow.
But then you've got things like lymphoid tissue that's part of your immune system, and get this tissue actually like overshoots its growth target in childhood.
Overshoots. Like it's overachieving in the growth department.
Yeah. It peaks around age 10, and then, get this, it actually shrinks back down during puberty. Talk about a growth spurt in reverse.
Wow. So it's like our bodies are prepping for something big early on, and then they recalibrate during puberty. And, this isn't just some random biological quirk. This is actually relevant to, like, anyone listening.
Yeah, absolutely. Like, this knowledge helps explain why certain orthodontic treatments might work better before puberty when that lymphoid tissue is still at its peak. It's all about timing.
Timing is everything. And speaking of timing, you might be surprised to learn that your actual age, like your birth date, it isn't always the best indicator of your growth stage.
You're telling me, I mean, we all know teenagers who seem way older than they are, right? And vice versa. That's because we don't all age at the exact same rate.
And that's where dental age and skeletal age come in, right?
Yeah.
They're like more accurate measures of maturity than just how many birthdays you've had.
Exactly. Dental age, that's all about looking at the teeth, which ones have come in, how developed they are. It's like a little window into your overall development.
And skeletal age.
Yeah.
That's where things get really interesting. That's where the hand x-rays come in, right?
Yeah. It might seem weird, but those little bones in your hand, they can tell us a lot about your skeletal maturity. Yeah. By looking at how those bones are developing, we can get a way better sense of how much growth you have left. compared to just going by your birth date.
So it's like you're looking for clues about your growth potential, but instead of looking at your teeth, you're looking at your hand bones.
Exactly. And that's super useful when you're planning orthodontic treatment, right? Because you don't want to fight against those growth patterns. You want to work with them.
You want to be strategic about it. So we've got these growth patterns, these different ways of measuring maturity, but where does the actual growth happen? Like, what are the hot spots, the growth centers in the face?
So imagine a city. Growth sites are like those up-and-coming neighborhoods that are under construction. There's a lot of activity, things are expanding, but growth centers, those are like downtown,
Yeah.
They're calling the shots, driving growth in a certain direction.
So growth sites are the construction zones, and the growth centers are the city planners making sure everything expands in a coordinated way.
Precisely. And in our faces, most of the action actually happens at those growth sites. Take the sutures, for example. Those fibrous joints between the bones of your skull.
Yeah.
Those are constantly responding to forces around them, laying down new bone tissue. Like, think about a baby's brain. It's growing so fast, those sutures have to work overtime.
Wow. It's amazing how adaptable our bodies are.
It really is. But there is one major exception to this whole growth site thing, and that's the mandibular condyle.
Oh, what dial?
The mandibular condyle. It's that little rounded part of your jawbone that connects to your skull. And unlike those sutures, the condyle, it's a true growth center, like a mini city planner living in your jaw.
So it's not just responding to forces, it's creating them.
Exactly. It's got its own internal growth engine, setting the pace for how your lower jaw grows. Pretty amazing.
It really is. And understanding that difference between growth sites and centers, that's got to be important for orthodontists, right?
Oh, absolutely. That's how they figure out how to work with your natural growth to give you a healthy bite and, a beautiful smile.
Right. And speaking of which, let's talk about the process of bone formation itself. Because believe it or not all bone is created equal.
It's kind of like, if you're building a house, you can use different materials, different techniques, and you get a totally different structure. Yeah.
Okay, I like where this is going. So what's the bone building equivalent of like bricks versus timber?
Okay, so with bone, we've got these two main construction crews, so to speak, and they're called endochondral ossification and intramembranous ossification.
Okay, those are some big words, but I'm ready. Lay it on me.
All right, so endochondral ossification, this one's all about building with a blueprint. Imagine you're starting with a cartilage model, like a little framework, and then slowly you replace it with bone.
So it's like, I don't know, pouring concrete over rebar to
Yeah.
make a foundation.
Perfect analogy. That's how most of our long bones grow, like
Yeah.
in our arms and legs. It's also how the base of our skull, that kind of expands outward.
And this process, it's happening throughout childhood and into those teenage years, right?
Absolutely. This gradual process of growing from the inside out. Now, intramembranous ossification, this one's a little different. This one's more freeform. Like, imagine you're sculpting with clay.
So no cartilage blueprint this time.
Nope. Bone just forms directly within a membrane. It's like adding layers to the outside of that clay sculpture, to make it thicker, make it stronger.
So endochondral ossification, that's about length, making those long bones long, and then intramembranous ossification is more about thickness.
You're getting it. And these processes, they don't just work in isolation. Often they'll team up to create these like super intricate structures, like take the mandible, the lower jaw. That uses both types of bone formation.
Right. And we talked about the mandibular condyle earlier, that little growth center in the jaw. So that's endochondral ossification at work there, pushing the lower jaw forward.
Exactly, like a little engine pushing the lower jaw out. And while that's happening, intramembranous ossification, that's busy on the surfaces of the mandible, adding bone to the back so there's room for those molars to come in.
Wow. So it's a real team effort. But it's not just about the bone itself, right? Our mental dental source material also talked about these like different theories about what actually drives craniofacial growth.
Yeah, and it's a hot debate in the scientific community, It's like these different schools of thought all trying to solve this puzzle of how our faces grow into their unique shapes.
Right. There's the suture theory, the cartilage theory, and the functional matrix theory. And it seems like they've each got a slightly different take on what's really in the driver's seat.
Exactly. Like take the suture theory, for example. So for a long time, people thought that sutures, those fibrous joints between your skull bones, they were like the main drivers of growth.
Like little engines pushing those bones apart.
Yeah. But as time went on and we did more research, it turns out those sutures are actually more responsive than proactive.
meaning they react to forces
Yeah.
rather than generating them
Right,
themselves.
like they're the construction workers who come in after the foundation has been poured, laying down new bone in response to the brain expanding and all that.
Okay, so one theory down, two to go. What about the cartilage theory? That one puts cartilage in the driver's seat, right?
Exactly. This one was really pushed forward by this researcher named James Scott, and he was all about how cartilage, especially the cartilage in that mandibular condyle we talked about, it's got this inherent ability to grow, to expand, and that influences all the bone around it.
And that actually explains why, like, if you fracture your condo, it can actually regenerate.
Right, right. If sutures were the only things driving growth, then a fractured condyle, that'd be it, game over. But the fact that it can heal that way suggests that cartilage, it's got some of its own mojo going on.
Interesting. So we've got some good evidence for the cartilage theory. What about the functional matrix theory? How does that one fit in?
This one's a real game changer. Melvin Moss, he was the big name behind this theory, and he shifted the focus away from bones and cartilage and onto, get this, soft tissue.
You mean like muscles, your tongue, even the pressure from breathing?
All of that. Moss argued that it's actually those functional demands like chewing, swallowing, talking, even just breathing that really drive how our faces grow.
So you're saying it's like the soft tissues are shaping the hard tissues, that our actions are literally sculpting our faces.
That's the gist of it. According to this theory, the soft tissues create the space and then the bones just grow to fill it in.
That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
And that would explain why, for instance, babies who mostly breathe through their mouths might end up with narrower palates, right?
Exactly, because if you're not breathing through your nose, it changes those forces on your maxilla, your upper jaw, and that can influence how it grows.
It's amazing how interconnected everything is. So which one of these theories is right?
Well, if I had a crystal ball, right? Honestly, it's probably a bit of all three. Sutures respond to forces? Sure. Cartilage probably has some inherent growth potential. And there's no doubt that the demands we put on our faces, how we use them, it plays a big role in shaping them.
It's like this beautiful symphony of factors all working together.
Yeah.
Okay, so we've got these big picture theories down,